action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Jenni Romaniuk. In June 2020, episode 39, we cast a net off the coast of Adelaide to catch one of the globe's greatest researchers and sci-fi fans. Research professor and associate director at that conveyor belt of marketing minds, the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, Jenni has advised many of the world's biggest brands. Now she's back, 3 years and one new book better. We've snared Jenni for a chinwag on her latest industry bible, Better Brand Health. In our last episode, Jenni said, when we're building distinctive brand assets, the context is the brand. And when you're building brand, the context is the category that you are operating in. Context is vital, as without it, you cannot embed the brand or asset in the memory, and it cannot be retrieved later. Welcome back to the show, Jenni.
Hi, Giles.
Right, 7 quickfire questions. And a quick reminder that these don't have to be fair comparisons, Jenni. So, cocktails or karaoke?
Cocktails.
How brands grow or a scandalous life?
Depends on where I am.
Right here, right now.
No, that's where I am. I'm going to go for a scandalous life.
Wonderful, wonderful. Spider charts or flow charts?
Yikes. Gouging my eye with a spoon? Is that an option?
We'll grant that one.
Can I pick C?
Yes. Yeah. This one's unfair. Professor Karen Nelson Field or Dr. Grace Kite?
That is unfair because I worked with Karen for many years and I have actually only ever met Grace once for a short period of time just before we each spoke separately at the Festival of Marketing. So I can't really win in that sort of situation.
Both is fair. The Juster scale or the Richter scale?
Well, I'll go to Juster scale because that might tell me the probability that a earthquake will happen in the future, whereas the Richter scale will only tell me when it's happening, and by then it might be a bit too late.
What a smart answer. Okay, this one's ditched brand assets. So, Toblerone's Matterhorn or San Pellegrino's foil top?
Oh, the foil top was a much sadder loss. I mean, the Toblerone, I know there's a bit of fuss about it, but quite frankly, how many people knew it was a Matterhorn anyway? I mean, the only reason it's actually a real problem is because it's a meaning asset, so they have to change it. If they just put any random mountain on there, would have been a problem.
Well said. And finally, best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago or now?
20 years ago, definitely, and particularly the speed my pomegranate tree is growing, because I love pomegranates. And I noticed that there is a definite disparity between people who have pomegranate trees and people who like pomegranates. The Venn diagram hardly crosses over at all. And I'm one of those people who loves pomegranates and has never had a pomegranate tree apart from when I was growing up with my grandparents had one. And so I've decided to grow my own, but it's really slow.
Wow. Amazing. So, Jenni, listen, we're delighted to have you on the show again. So, to kick things off, we usually ask about the route our guest has taken in their career to date. But for the sake of time, we'll encourage anyone who wants to hear about your first job as a talented mixologist in a football club bar making fruit cups to listen to our first episode, which we'll link to.
At 14, shall we say? That's an important part of the story.
At 14, yes. Yeah, very dubious. So for this episode, we're going to get stuck straight into your latest book, Better Brand Health, if we may. Can you tell us about how that came about? Because that last quickfire was a reference you make at the end of your new book about your time writing it and that kind of mindset of feeling like maybe you should have done it before?
Yeah. I mean, I'd always been interested in brand, well, basically stuff in people's heads about brands and how they use it. It's always fueled my research. And the brand health tracker is essentially that brought to life on a regular basis, because it's what, companies are trying to track to understand how the stuff in people's heads is going, and are they doing a good job, and is this going to turn all out right for them? And when we started previously as the Marketing Science Centre, when we were not global but quite small and local, we operated like a boutique market research agency in a more general sense. So we work in research with companies now, but it's in our core product areas. Back then, we were kind of just taking whatever we could, and that included brand health tracking. So I managed a few different trackers for different organisations, and, probably did an okay job of it, mainly because I didn't really know much. And the thing about brand tracking is that a lot of times you're kind of trying to sort of retrofit an explanation to something changing. And this was really very dissatisfying for me. And so I decided to set about unpacking the different areas of brand tracking. So I worked out there was those sort of different parts of the questionnaire, and I wanted to understand them all in more detail. So over a period of about a decade, I had different researchers coming in doing PhDs, Masters by Research, who would want thesis topics. And so I would give them topics related to brand health tracking. So I had someone doing one on brand awareness, someone else doing one on how do we get good measures of brand and category buying, someone else looking at negative perception, someone else was looking at word of mouth online, different areas where people were exploring different parts of it to get an understanding of how this whole thing worked together. And some of the inadequacies in it were what fueled my own research into category entry points as type of attributes, because I noticed that a lot of the attribute lists were all about brands. And I'm like, but isn't the buyer's brain and what's going on in their lives and also an important part of this? And, distinctive assets, which we noticed was missing totally, this whole idea of this area of brand identity, and yet there was no way to track it. So that sort of went off into the side things. And also because I didn't know quite what to do with all this knowledge. So it just would bubble up every so often. Some of it ended up in publications academically, but quite frankly, academia wasn't all that interested in brand health tracking. It's kind of like not pure data. And so, so it kind of sat in the back burner until I finished 2 other books and felt, right, now I think I need to tackle this, because I just kind of realized if I didn't do it, I didn't know who would, because of the comprehensiveness of knowledge that needed to come into it. But it also meant I had to redo a whole heap of stuff, because it's been such a long time since I did the first round. So that took a lot longer as well, of replicating different studies to check to see they still hold. So I had more recent examples to put in to the book as well. And so, and then also talking to marketers and, realizing just how frustrated so many of them were with this part of their research budget they were spending a lot of money on. And so all of that came together to go, well, I've got to give it a go and see if I can write this thing.
So I suppose passively, if that's the right word, you've been working on this book for, I suppose, most of your career, but maybe more actively in the last kind of year or so.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, isn't it? Especially when you talk to someone who has published so much work, whether it's the papers that you've published or the books themselves, you kind of maybe falsely expect there to be some kind of chronological order, but actually this sits right at the heart, as well as being something that has followed your work with distinctive assets and other areas.
Yeah, and it was really hard to know how to write this book. I mean, I did have people telling me, why are you bothering writing this? No one's going to read it. No one's that interested in this. Or
That's
maybe
kind.
a few nerdy people are interested in it. Yeah, some people are like that. But yeah, and I mean, I kind of went, I'm more took it on board to say, that's a really good point. It could quite easily descend into something that's so nerdy and so sort of textbooky that maybe people would not find it that interesting and it would be too dry and uninteresting to read. So I sort of went, well, can I lift it such that it so what I've tried to do with this book is do two things. And it's always a risk when you're trying to do two things. You do neither well. But I wanted this to be a book for those who are getting their hands dirty, designing questionnaires, working out how to word attributes, all of the nitty-gritty stuff that go in that is somewhat unappreciated because there are so many things that you just turn a little bit left to center and you can screw up your data quality. But I also wanted to write it so that the people who maybe are not that involved with it, but are relying on these metrics either for their own KPIs to make decisions, to understand, what was really working in marketing, would also want to read it and get that basis for getting the whole philosophy, trajectory, and foundation right in the tracking activities that they did, and know enough to know when something's good and when something could be problematic.
In the last couple of minutes, you mentioned about talking to marketers who seemed frustrated. Were they frustrated mostly with their existing brand tracking perhaps not being very effective or at least accurate? Or were they frustrated because there was a neglect to track and measure brand health? Because another word you used was that it was kind of unappreciated. And from my perspective, I can understand people feeling frustrated because their brand health that they're expected to manage is often unappreciated in favour of probably more accessible metrics.
A bit of both. I mean, I remember talking, I had a really great discussion with Bruce McCall, who was the global CMO of Mars and was our industry professor, and he was very anti-brand health tracking, and he actually stopped it at Mars. And he said basically he found it a waste of money, and not just that, a waste of management time, because it would take them like 2 days to go through the reports and, getting everyone together to do all this and stuff. He just went, really, what are we getting out of this? And, we spent a bit of time talking through, and I explained my point of view, and he was, it was kind of like, I don't say I definitely convinced him, because it was just one conversation, but it needed at least two to totally change someone's mind. But he at least appreciated it more, but I got to understand what he found to be frustrating about it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a whole combination of stuff of just the lack of robustness in the measures, the lack of the following of trends and fads, which leads to new things getting put into questionnaires, getting tried in questionnaires, but then no one be willing to kick things out. Think about tracking is everyone wants to keep things tracking, even if they don't exactly know why. And, I think in academia too, there's been a really lack of scrutiny of this. It's not, even I was really puzzled why there hadn't been more development in brand awareness. It's a pretty simple metric. Surely we should know a lot of it by now. And then I actually, spent some time delving into all the papers that claim to include brand awareness in academic papers, and discovered they'd all been using a 4-point scale to measure brand awareness, that you get people to rate things on things like, this is a brand I have seen before, strongly agree, strongly disagree. I know this brand versus that, but words like that effect, and it's like, how do you slightly agree with that? Just out of curiosity. I slightly agree. I may have somehow seen this before. You have or you haven't, really. And so, and so this is just, so there's been a lack of fundamental R&D feeding into it. And then what industry's been going along measuring brand awareness in its own way, and the academic community's either just totally ignored it because they just control for it and how they're doing the studies, or they're using proxies. There was a paper that said, we measured advertising awareness and we're just going to call that brand awareness because it's close enough. It's like, no, it's not, and you can't do that. So I just find that there's this it's just been somewhat stagnated, and then And then there's all these new metrics that come out that everyone feels they have to get on the bandwagon for. But it's like, wow, wait a sec, there's still some really big things we need to learn even about the fundamentals.
And do you think those new metrics are one of many common problems that brands face when measuring brand health? I suppose that's almost a distraction of sorts, as much as it is about the maybe flawed ways they measure.
Look, I mean, I don't want to stifle innovation. And I think it's great to come up with new ideas, new testing and new things, but you have to allow them to be tested. And I think, so if you want to get enthusiastic about a new measure that's untested, do. And, because sometimes it needs proponents to get it out there and test it and create the conditions and environments for testing. But be open enough to be able to say, if the testing shows doesn't really have legs, to go, okay, I was wrong with that. Now on to the next thing. It's okay to be enthusiastic without evidence, but then you have to be able to revise your opinion about that enthusiasm if the evidence doesn't come in the way you want it to. But it's not even new metrics that this is a problem with. Even the old metrics, there's a lot of lack of evidence that doesn't seem to be an issue for people believing in measures. I once had a fascinating conversation with someone talking about top-of-mind awareness, who was convinced that was the best metric. And I said, well, a bit of evidence that it's problematic on a few fronts, and explained a few of those. And they just went, no, you're wrong. No, don't disagree with that. And I said, okay, well, let's take another way. Can you explain to me the evidence that is why you believe top-of-mind awareness is a great measure? I don't have any. I just believe it is. And it's like, how do you deal with that? You can't really, can you?
No, especially if that's a loud voice within an organisation.
Yeah. Well, or someone, controlling what sort of metrics are out there. But, if you're not willing to say, well, why am I tracking this? What is this? Where does this fit in with, particularly with what we know about how brands grow? Yeah, we're just not going to get anywhere. So this is a conversation I wanted to open up with this book, to go, well, let's put a how brands grow lens on this. And let's see what this tells us about these different measures and, whether or not they've got a chance of succeeding. Because even if we can get rid of a few where we go, on balance, it's really unlikely this is going to work for these reasons, that at least narrows down to we can properly test the ones that do have a chance.
There's a point, and this is probably a good time to bring it up, that you make in the book, and actually the point you just made about Bruce in his time at Mars kind of echoes it, that brand tracking is often seen as time-consuming and costly, and results in these huge decks that provide either little insight or just hard to kind of process and understand and get value from. How much easier is it to track a brand versus what people assume?
I don't think it has to be that complicated. But you have to have a reason. I sort of divide metrics into two types. There are some things that are continual assessments of your performance, because these things always matter. And there are some things that are more switch on, switch off metrics, depending on the context. They're very only in these sorts of situations. And the more we can understand that, the more because what happens now is you get two extremes. You have on one hand the everything everywhere all at once dashboards that just have 3,000 different metrics with traffic light stops of red, green and yellow. Or the other extreme is you have I want only one metric and that has to work for everything all the time, all at once. So, and, surely we can be a little bit more sophisticated than that and go, we can have a range of metrics, but understand the context in which they are, the specific ones are important. So, for example, if you take something like brand rejection, okay, benchmark it. You've probably got low and normal rejection, as in normal, just like other brands in your category. That is overwhelmingly the typical response. So does that mean you keep tracking it and reporting on it every single wave? No, not really. You don't need to do that. So you think to yourself, when might brand rejection matter? Well, it might matter if we screw up in some way, shape or form. we, our product formulation's not right. We launch something that's a bit of a dud. There's something goes wrong. We want to check, is that got blowback on the rest of the brand? If we launch something new, we might want to keep an eye on our brand rejection because we want to see if there are any barriers to people trialing it that might hamper its success. What about if a competitor launches something new? Might want to check on that too to see whether or not that's going to become a major player and something we should look out for. But outside of those circumstances, why worry about it? So that's when we can get a bit more sophisticated, I think.
Can you just quickly explain what brand rejection as a measure is and how you would measure that? Just because I'm mindful there's people that might not know and there's lots of students who listen.
So brand rejection is an attitudinal measure, and it's one whereby you sort of say, I'm not going to buy that brand. I refuse to buy that brand. And now we do know that saying you would refuse to, having an attitude of refusing to buy something doesn't mean you will never buy it. And I give my darling younger niece, Gabby, example of that. I think I gave that in How Brands Grow Part 2 of her hating a particular fast food outlet until we were in Sydney airport. It was the only fast food joint and she was really hungry after a long flight. She took my credit card, went, bought breakfast, did not even bat an eyelid. Follow up to the story. Now she actually likes the brand and talks about how great its fries are, which, if this is a total 180 from where she was about 4 or 5 years ago. So it can happen. You can go from rejection to, I wouldn't say love, but at least a strong liking. But yeah, so it's just about that they have an attitudinal barrier to buying. And the reason it's important to understand is for us with a sort of mental availability mindset, if you have a high level of rejection, it means your mental availability building activities won't translate to sales because people will think of the brand, but then they'll go, no, I don't want to buy that. And so they'll reject it in the second stage. And so you do want to double check you don't have anything that's untoward in terms of holding you back. It also is important from a mindset perspective because a lot of people, when we talk about that you grow by expanding your customer base, there's a lot of people who still believe that people who don't buy the brand have a reason why they don't, and that there's a barrier. They've somehow, that the people who don't buy the brand have thought about it and gone, nope, not doing that. And this just reminds people that actually, no, the vast majority of people who don't buy your brand don't have any reason why not. They just never thought of it in buying situations.
It's really interesting. What in the process of researching for today's episode, both Beth and I mean, we do a lot of reading. I might not come across as particularly learned when I interview people, but I was reading a post of yours that you made a couple of months ago, and that's how I actually discovered the Juster scale that I used in the quickfires earlier. And what I found fascinating with that is that, and I'm reading this direct from your quote, these aren't my words, but in the 1960s, consumer follow-up studies found that more consumers with no previously stated intention purchased a category than consumers with a previously stated intention. That's fascinating, and actually goes to show how easily kind of misunderstood or even flawed a measure could be, or a question could be, just by its wording.
Well, it's actually about the assumptions, because it's not that intentions measures are bad, they just make assumptions that people have plans and then they follow through with that. And there is a reason why it's called the road to hell. The best example of this is from the work from Thomas Juster, who is the scale is named after, and basically asking things like, do you intend your fridge to break down? Well, no, you don't intend that, but you can have a probability your fridge will break down if it's old, it's been making weird noises. So you can answer a different question from, do you intend to buy a new fridge? No, I don't intend to. What's the probability you're going to have to buy a new fridge? Well, that's a different question because that you take into account the circumstance. And there are some other things that are different because an intention usually implies some sort of latent predisposition to act. I intend to do something. I have plans. I'm going to act on them. Whereas a probability doesn't make that assumption. It actually asks people to essentially do an on-the-spot calculation based on what they know. And that's going to be imperfect. That's why even probabilities don't fully translate. but it will give the evidence is it gives a more realistic view of what's likely to happen, because people don't just factor in what they want to do, they also factor in what happens in the world. If you've got kids, you're more likely, your probability of getting sick is going to be higher than if you don't. You don't intend to get ill, but you just know you're probably going to.
Yeah, I can confirm that's true. My two little bug spreaders at home.
Disease-carrying vectors.
They're filthy things. It must have been in the small print. I mean, something that comes up time and time again in my world, and I'm mindful that my world isn't the same as everyone else's world when we're looking at kind of agencies and client types. But I talk to lots of businesses and brands who probably need convincing that they need to be tracking their brand health in some way, which might seem absurd if you're, I don't know, I was going to say if you're Bruce at Mars, but obviously back in the day, perhaps that wouldn't have been the case. But is there ever a case for not tracking brand health?
If you've got personal contact with your customers and you can ask them questions, then maybe there's other ways of getting that information on what's going on in their heads. And this can be everything from, like, if you are, say you're a B2B company and you're working with just a few multinationals, then there might be different ways of getting that sort of information. Because you've got a limited number of people. So it's basically your sample is inaccessible for an independent interview. Because the beauty of brand health tracking is it's if it's done right, it's an unbiased view of what's going on in the buyer's head that's not contaminated by the brand commissioning the research. Whereas if you are, if they know it's you asking the question, they might not want to necessarily be too honest about things or just not give you the full picture for whatever reason. So that's the advantage of doing it independently through a separate agency, or you can do it, a company can do it themselves. With the book, all of the analyses that are in the book can be done with a very basic statistics package and a good use of Excel. You don't really need anything particularly fancy or complicated to do it. So, I mean, I'm just, if you're going out there trying to build memories and change memories, then how do you know if you're going to do a job if you're not assessing that? Now, you could say, I'm looking at my sales figures, but you won't know why. You'll know what, but not why. And that to me is the power of good brand health tracking, is it helps fill in the why. And so, but it can only do that to the extent that you get quality information.
Yeah, it's really well said. I just had flashbacks actually to a question you fielded at DNX in Dublin when we first met, where someone, I think, asked you under what circumstances would there be argument for a complete rebrand of a business. And I think you said something along the lines of, I'm yet to see it.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant, and I couldn't agree more. You mentioned there about building and changing memories, and I forget whose quote it was originally, but it's probably been repurposed numerous times anyway, but someone said that we are, in effect, in the business of managing memories. And you just talked about building and changing memories. What roles do the brand attributes play in those memories, and how useful are they to category buyers?
Well, I mean, brand attributes are a bit of a catch-all for a whole range of different types of memories. So yeah, I mean, we use lots of different words that really mean the same things. You can use associations, perceptions, attributes. They're all just things that are or can be linked to the brand in category buyer memory. And they have different roles to play because of how memory works. So some, their job is to evoke the brand. Some are more strongly linked such that when the brand is the cue, they will be evoked. And so depending on the role of them, there are sorts of different types. And over the years, there have been different types of attributes proposed for better or for worse. So, for example, we have things like, human personality traits, which are considered to be brand attributes. That was a whole... and still is actually permeates quite a number of brand health trackers where they're assessing whether brands are considered charming or dynamic or friendly, or there's about 20 odd different persons, stubborn or arrogant or down to earth. Yeah, it gets weird sometimes. I was quite relieved. I still remember one of the first things I looked at was the brand asset valuator data from the UK, and I was quite relieved that only 3% of the British population found their condiments charming.
Any idea which condiment it was?
Yeah, no, condiments in general.
In general, okay.
So stuff, 3% of the population. Now, we can question those. There's put it this way, there's always weirdos in any population that are about 3%. But I remember thinking, okay, so if you do ask people a weird question, they can choose not to answer it. That's useful to know. I had more respect for survey methodology when I discovered that. Yeah, if we're talking about it from a purely memory perspective, the role of brand attributes are predominantly to either evoke the brand or be evoked by the brand.
And how should we approach building that list of attributes? Because I mean, the way I see it and the way I trained, I obviously there's a lot of crossover here, and you're right to flag that people might call these associations or attributes or characteristics, or there's so much not ambiguity. There's semantics plays a big role here in how people practice this work. But for me, it goes back to even the Aurie's work on positioning, and seeing how significant those attributes might be in terms of driving purchase or consideration. But how should we approach building an attribute list and choosing what to measure and what is and isn't significant? Because obviously charming for condiments perhaps isn't.
Well, I like to go back and go, well, the person who's actually putting this in their memory, why are they doing that? What's the purpose of it? And the reason for that is that the thing you learn about memory pretty quickly is it doesn't do anything it doesn't really want to do, and tries to get out of things with as little energy expenditure as possible. Occasionally it likes to stretch itself a little bit more, but often not in the circumstances that would be the most useful for it. So you think about what do we need our memories for? Well, our memories essentially allow us to use the past, take our past experiences and use them to make the current and the future a bit better, a bit easier. So we often want to shortcut things to get to where we want to buy. So we don't want to spend a lot of time agonizing thinking about it, because every time we have to do something from scratch, that's hard work cognitively. So our brain keeps a few things in there that help us. So, I'm here in London. There are a few places I know when I just need a quick meal I can go to. But there are other options. But my brain already just goes, here's a couple, these will do for you. So when you think about the different roles that associations play, so they can get the brand thought of, that's what we call category entry points. And we want to make sure we've got a good representation of those, because quite frankly, if the brand's not thought of, everything else is pretty redundant. Now, there are some attributes that are more kind of hygiene factors, or I call them baseline competencies, in that in any category, there are some things that you just got to do, and you don't want to underperform in them, because then people will doubt and you may get some form of rejection out of it. But you don't necessarily need to succeed, like go above and beyond. So things like trustworthy, reliable, good quality, if it's a food product, tastes great. These are things that are just basically table stakes that you want to keep up there with everybody, but you don't necessarily need. People won't buy the most trustworthy brand, but they're going to think twice about something that is underperforming on trust. So that's a difference. So how you interpret that data is differently. Distinctive assets are really important, brand memories to build, and they are technically attributes in the broader sense. But I don't necessarily consider them part of the tracker because of the way they need to be measured and the frequency, which is much more sporadic than you might do with tracking. And so I actually think they're probably better handled as a small standalone study in themselves. So that's a brand attribute, but I don't necessarily wouldn't put that in a tracker. So I put a formula together of about sort of 60-70% category entry points, 20 to 30% baseline competencies, and then about 10-20% of other stuff, because there are some other interesting attributes that I've seen that people have put in. Some might be put in for reporting on things like corporate social responsibility or, triple bottom line metrics type of things, more so than necessarily because they're considered major influences on buyer behaviour. But I will, just on something you said there, Giles, just be wary of driver analysis. Most of it's flawed.
Time, weather, and...
Boom! Sorry. It's just most podcasts would drop a jarring advert into this vacuous point in space and time. But Gasp don't do podcast ads. And if we did, we'd probably subvert the form in a clever way that ironically gets you to contact the host, Giles Edwards, on 01189 952 007. Only the other day, some pod listening companies did just that, calling us for guidance on strategy and direct mail. Please don't do that. Now, back to the show.
No, I am your father.
Yeah, I had Yoda pinned for Luke's father anyway. Hang on.
Is that true when driver
Oh,
analysis is kind of measured passively? Because I see the biggest trap there, and I might be misunderstanding what your point is, but I see the biggest trap in people asking in a survey what drives purchase, when of course people can't necessarily know that, but almost passively capturing that data, you can sometimes uncover some drivers.
Yeah, no. I think I'm talking about also what you might be measuring, where you might measure brand perceptions and people's propensity to buy, and you then model the relationship between, did they link the brand to this or rate the brand on this, and their propensity in buying. Yeah, even that's really flawed. There's a couple of, I spent a lot of really geeky time looking at underlying patterns in brand perceptual data, more so than I probably ever want to confess. But one of the things that often happens in driver analysis, and this happens a lot in a lot of statistical analysis, and that is this statistics, when you're looking at that sort of modelling, often really, really values the rare. And it will go, oh, well, if the rare does something, then that must be really important. So I'm going to give it a big weighting of importance, whether that be a B value, a significance value, and some sort of whatever sort of modelling you're doing. I did this analysis actually working with the brand asset valuator data, because the way that data was collected was there was a generic set of attributes that were applied to a wide range of categories. And that just kind of, I just thought, well, this is a bit weird. There must be some, there's obviously some attributes here. Like, for example, one of the attributes was healthy, and one of the categories was cars. I went, who says their car is healthy? And invariably there would be a couple of people who did. So that led me to the question to go, so these are obviously weird kind of linkages people are making. So who's making those linkages? Are they people who know nothing about the car? Or are they people who pretty much would say anything? Basically you say, which is the brand most likely to be found on the moon? And they'd go, yeah, that's the brand, type of thing. And it turned out it was the latter. The people who were giving these kind of what would be considered at face value quite weird linkages weren't people who were incorrect or guessing or, just felt like they should say something. They weren't just sporadic. They were actually people who would pretty much say anything linked to the brand. And so what that happens, and they tend to be really heavy category buyers. So the people who give rare associations are heavy category buyers. So if you model them, it looks like, oh my God, having that rare association makes you be a heavy category buyer, and it's a reverse causality. It's just because they are heavy category buyers that they would say anything. And that's one of the problems with driver analysis is it tends to overvalue rare associations because of that. Yeah, and so there's other stuff as well, but that's just one example whereby if you don't understand the underlying patterns, brands. You can come to some faulty assumptions based on the modelling.
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. I was wondering maybe if it was their car had broken down, so they were forced to walk more. I think we'd better go to listener questions, Jenny, just because we've got 3 that I intend to hurl your way. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. So today we've got 3. I'm going to start with one that feels closest to what we've been talking about, and it comes from Zoe. And Zoe asks, quite simply, how much can category entry points vary between category buyers? Incidentally, I really enjoyed your Festival of Marketing talk on this point, and you actually had a great slide where you used champagne to demonstrate your W framework, and it reminded me of that brilliant Lily Bollinger quote about when she drinks champagne. I'm not sure if you've heard it.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that might be an anomaly.
I have heard it. I can't repeat it, but yes, I heard it. Well, yeah, I always say my favourite time to drink champagne is Tuesday. Well, no, because Tuesday is usually a day where, funny enough, the last time I was talking about this was actually Tuesday as well. But Tuesday tends to be a day whereby not that much is going on. You know, it's not that bad. I've had Monday, but it's not near the end of the week. And my feeling of champagne is that it's always better when you're feeling okay, because then you can go up a lot with some good champagne. If you only have champagne when you're celebrating, there's not much. How much better can you feel? You're celebrating already. So that's just me. But yeah, no, category entry points can vary a lot across people. And some category entry points can be really, really, really individually specific if you really dive into a person. But the problem is they're not very scalable, so they're not very interesting from a marketing perspective. They're interesting from an anthropological perspective, not very useful for messaging in an ad campaign. So we need to find some things that have some common ground with lots of people agreeing, even though individually people might have their own sets of category entry points. There are some that are universal too, to enough people to make it worthwhile for a marketer to invest in building up links to the brand with it. But yes, individually there's a lot of heterogeneity, and that's something that's often lost when we see brand health tracking. The individual heterogeneity underneath gets masked in the roll-up of, 45% said our brand has this quality, and 72% said we have this other quality, and 26% is other quality. When we roll up data that way, we kind of lose the sense of the quite diverse range of buyers underneath.
But I suppose for good reason too, you almost need to.
Yeah, but when we do our category entry point studies, one of the things we do include, which I'm pretty sure our researchers really don't like me for making them do, is we do a slide where we show one person across a set of 4 or 5 category entry points, the actual brands they had linked to it, to make the point that this data we're showing you is made up of all these people, and these people, when they have different category entry points, will have different brands and different numbers of brands linked to it. And your job as a marketer is to try to get into as many of these different evoke sets for as many people as possible. And each time you do that, you're going to sometimes be the only brand, sometimes you're one of 10, and all of in between. You can be in 2 different evoke sets of 4 brands with totally different brands, or 2 are the same and 1 is totally different. That's the reality of memories, the variability of it, and what we're working with. And I think if we need to retain some sense of that, because that probabilistic nature of memory stops us from falling in the traps of thinking that memory building is something that you do, you finish, and you go home and you move on to something else. So yeah, I like doing that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. We can't just neatly tidy these things up in little groups all the time, and we need to acknowledge that. Question 2 is from our own John Lyons. I mean, we've touched on this, but John asks, do you think that the industry is doing brand surveys poorly, or is the issue more that many aren't doing them at all?
I think it's a bit of both. In that I don't think surveys are, well, I don't want to describe them as poor. I think that some of them have just done the wrong things for the right reasons. And that's part of what I'm trying to unwind, because I do remember the discussions of why some of these changes have happened in how, for example, we word attributes. We're at a frustration because there was not much change being seen. And so people were trying to experiment with different ways of getting more sensitive data. It's just unfortunate that the decisions they made actually made the data less sensitive than some other decisions they could have made. So part of it is about, giving a framework so that people make better decisions and some suggestions of what those better decisions might be. But I'm hoping the book is more of a conversation starter than pretending that, we've solved brand tracking now, I can move on to something else. Because there's still a lot to learn in that field. But I want to just set the parameters of the discussion to go, well, let's think about who's important here. Let's think about what we're trying to do. Let's think about the marketing activity we're doing and try to design something that helps us across the board. I do think some people have given up and have stopped doing it or stopped paying attention to it, and that is to the detriment. And, it is to some extent, particularly the beginning part of it, there's a bit of a love letter to brand health tracking as to why I do think it's a really important part of the research that a company does to understand and improve its brand's performance. So, I do want it to get better. And I also want that from a selfish perspective, because the better quality data that companies have to make decisions now means better quality data for R&D ongoing, which is sort of, this is what we need to move forward as a profession as well.
The third question is from a Call to Action alumni and good friend of GAS, Brian McCready. And I'm interested to know your opinion on this, because obviously his point here is UK specific, but your answer doesn't need to be. But Brian says, just today I re-stumbled over two of my favourite ever ads. The Lily Allen Somewhere Only We Know one for John Lewis and the Peter K. Avett for John Smith's, and I got all the feels again. Anyway, I'd love to know what Jenni's favourite ads are.
There's an ad that actually surprises me how much I like it, and that I'm not sick of it given I see it all the time. And it's for a local company in Adelaide that is like a service station. They basically do like the shops and outlets at service stations. They're called On the Run, OTR. And they have an ad that's for a sub-brand of those called Moe's that is a hot dog brand. It's like a $3 hot dog. And it is hilarious. It's very funny to watch. It is got a really catchy tune. It's going through my head now as I'm talking to you, but I'm not going to sing it. You're just going to have to find the link and share that with people. But it's just a really, really, just really amazingly catchy, well-designed ad. The only slight criticism I have about it is it's trying to sell two brands, in that it's trying to sell the retailer brand and the product brand. And we know from our co-branding research, that's a really big challenge. So I don't know any success metrics on it, but I do think it's a very creative ad. And it always makes me smile. And I actually saw one of the actors at one of the, when we were out to lunch recently, or someone I was with pointed them out. And I'm like, oh my God, felt like I was a little bit starstruck.
Did you talk to them?
No. But the other, I will say, I saw an ad here in the UK that will always have a form of nostalgia for me, and it is the Beans Means Heinz, the substitution ad. And the reason I love that, anytime I see any ad with Beans Means Heinz, is that Gerald Goodhart, who is famous as one of Andrew Ehrenberg's big collaborators. He was, he did so much fantastic work, a lot of it behind the scenes. Andrew was the one that went out and presented. Gerald was kind of one of the key mathematicians behind the scene doing things, but he had the most wonderful sense of humor and was, such a generous person with his thoughts and times. Anyway, he first started out at a market research agency. And one of his first clients was Heinz. And he actually wrote the line that said in the report that said, to the British housewife, Heinz means beans. And that is what they turned around to create that tagline of beans means Heinz. And so whenever I think of that, I always think of Gerald. So it's a very fond memory for me.
That's wonderful. Oh, it's a great story. Well, Brian's going to be delighted with that. I'm going to try and find that Mo's ad. I might have to ask you to validate it and check that it's the right one. But
I'll see if I can send you a link.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, hopefully that will be in the listing as our listeners can have a quick scroll and see if it's there. The final part of the interview, Jenny, is our 4 pertinent poses. So I wonder if much has changed. Number 1 is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, God, I can't even remember what I gave myself last time. I would say start writing earlier and, relax, chill.
And planting pomegranate trees earlier.
Well, I actually moved house in 2018, so any pomegranate tree I'd planted earlier would have been no use to me
long gone. Okay. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one, because it's kind of like, I feel like you're putting me in front of a giant buffet and asking me to pick one thing and walk away, which is not really what a buffet is supposed to be for.
It's not, you're right.
Sort of stuff. All right, I'll just put it, the net promoter score. We should be over this by now. You know, it's had its run, it's tried, it was a great idea, but the evidence just, and some of the defense I see for it now, I just kind of like going, you're really trying hard to justify using this in the absence of any evidence. Maybe the best, the old adage, the best thing about banging your head against a brick wall is it feels so good when you stop. That's how I kind of feel about the net promoter score. Maybe we should just stop and we would feel better because, we wouldn't be hitting our head so hard.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I don't know if you met, I think you may have met Richard Hammond, or at least be familiar with Richard Hammond from Uncrowd, because he was speaking at DNX when we met in Dublin. But he would be whooping and cheering that point you just made, Jenny. Number 3, are there any books that you would recommend? So just for full transparency, in your previous episode you recommended A Scandalous Life, which is why I rather unfairly threw it into the quick fires. Is there anything you've read since that's worth a mention?
I have such trashy reading tastes right now that I'm not sure. I always think, how's this going to reflect on me? And probably not well. I've just been reading all sorts of different trash. Actually, currently reading the books on slow horses. Yeah, the Apple TV series. These the books behind them. I've been reading those. Yeah, I don't read a lot of serious stuff. I read a lot of fun stuff because I have to do serious stuff for work.
Well, precisely that. I actually know a few listeners at least who were really grateful for the Scandalous Life tip, including
good.
My wife Sophie, who devoured it and said it's probably the best book she's read in years.
Isn't it weird it hasn't been made into a movie? Her life was amazing. How is this not Netflix? What are you doing with yourself? This is a fantastic story. It is absolutely amazing. I don't have anything really to top that. Probably the only book I like that just generally is always a great read is Richard Feynman's The Meaning of It All. And the reason I like that is I love his description of George. And George was Richard Feynman didn't like doing admin, didn't like the whole things he didn't like doing. And he realised that he felt guilty when he just didn't do something. So he invented George, and he just said, George will do that. Now, George didn't exist, and George couldn't actually do anything. But he found that he just felt psychologically more comfortable not doing something if he imagined George was going to do it. And I think that's a really good philosophy to have for some things in our life, to just go, yeah, George will handle that. So I think, the book and Richard Feynman himself explained it so much more eloquently than I ever could. But yeah, it's that's a little bit of an intellectual read, but I love that perspective on life.
That's brilliant. I've never heard of that. I've never heard that story of George. I might start adopting that because that I can see that working really well with me. Brilliant. We would also list, obviously, Better Brand Health, which is available now worldwide. We had a little bit longer to wait than we wanted to, if I'm totally honest there. But it was available in ebook format and now hardbook.
Well, a few people got a more interesting book, perhaps, in their delivery if you actually pressed the wrong button and you got the version from Victoria Penn. Some people... Yeah, apparently there was a rather salacious soft porn novel that you got instead of Better Brand Health. So now when people say to me that they really enjoyed reading it and they learned a lot from it, I do have to ask them, which version did you get? Just checking before I say anything more. Can you just tell me a little bit about what you read first? Yeah, I was...
Not at all what we expected, but...
No, not right. I'm just thinking of all of the books to copy a parrot and send a soft porn novel in its place. Better Brand Health wouldn't have been in my top 100 choices, put it that way. I'm weirdly flattered, but a bit perturbed by the whole thing.
Did the reverse also
anyway.
happen? People who had ordered the soft porn received Better Brand Health, do we know?
I don't know, but yes, I haven't the thing, but no, it's the cover. So the covers, they've ripped off the cover and then written says my name and then a Victoria Penn underneath it, and it's his workbook. And then if you order that, you basically get like a really bad version of my cover, and inside is a printed book of a somewhat salacious nature, apparently. And so people have been getting this
fulfillment issue. Oh, wow.
No. This is people who have just... so what someone's done is a scam, and so they send you this, but you pay the price. So obviously the people are then reporting it to Amazon, and we, when people let us know, are reporting it to Amazon as well. But they are still out there. So just if anyone is ordering it, I did not co-author anything with Victoria Penn. It's just me on the authorship, and it's not a workbook. It's a genuine book. So, this is something. It's popped up in about 3 or 4 different countries.
That's absurd.
But I didn't think they actually got like a proper book, but someone in Canada informed me because they obviously opened it up and started reading it and went, okay, not where I was expecting this book to go. And then realised the error. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. What a weird happening. Well, I'm sorry for that, any... stress that's inevitably
particularly for a book on brand health. I mean, I understand for a whole heap of other books why you might do that. I just don't understand why you would do it for a book on brand health. I really don't. So yeah.
Well, the same people who have charming condiments and healthy cars, perhaps. Weird. There's weirdos out there. Number 4, then, Jenny, is we always dedicate every episode to someone. And we bestow that honour to our guest who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Oh, well, we were talking about my 2 pups and saying they've both been a bit in the wars. Poor Alf lost an eye due to eye cancer. So he's walking around with my little pirate dog, one-eyed, but still demanding food. And then I have my little Honey who is over 16 now, and basically, I said to him before I leave, can you just hold on? Still be there when I get back. So I'm going to dedicate this to both of them because they were with me all through the writing of the book, had to listen to me argue with myself about various things, and they sat through and listened to many a different podcast. Granted, Alf has snored through most of them, so I'm not sure, maybe Honey more than Alf, but you know. But yeah, they were the little support team that helped me write the book, and as always. So they're where I dedicate this one to.
Hey, super cool, brilliant. Well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to Alf and Honey. So as a final call to action, we will list everything discussed, including Better Brand Health, slow horses, the meaning of it all. We'll dig out Mo's ads.
But not the soft porn version.
Well, perhaps.
Let's not encourage that behaviour, Giles. Come on, we've got to draw a line somewhere. So no, I'm saying no to that one. You cannot list the link to the soft porn version of some book that is called Better Brand Health, the workbook. So yeah.
Okay, we won't link to that book, but it is out there. How else can our listeners get more Jenni Romaniuk?
Oh, yikes. Well, if anyone's in Seoul, I'll be speaking at a conference there in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited about that, not being to South Korea. So if anyone does have any recommendations for South Korea, please hit me up on LinkedIn. But yeah, LinkedIn's the main thing that where I interact with most.
Okay, we'll link to your profile there as well, just to make it extra easy for people to find you. Jenni, thank you for joining us again. It has been an absolute pleasure again and a privilege yet again to talk. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online, or you can email calltoaction@gasp.agency.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.